Awesome. So thank you very much for joining us for our next Ripple Ventures Tank Talk. I am Matt Cohen, founder and managing partner of Ripple Ventures. We're an early stage venture fund based in Toronto, focused on pre-seed, seed, and now with our newest opportunity fund, Seed Plus investments in and around the Northeast of North America in the B2B and enterprise SaaS space. I'm very excited to have our next guest on today's Tank Talk, Chris Rasmussen, founder and chairman of Doxim. Before we get into Chris and the talk, just a couple housekeeping items. There is a chat available for anyone to ask questions that are not addressed during today's conversation for the pre-submitted questions on Typeform. The conversation will be recorded, so you'll be able to rewatch it over and over again and share it with any of your colleagues or coworkers. And lastly, everyone will be on mute, so please do submit your questions through the chat if you'd like us to answer them. Without further ado, here is Chris Rasmussen. So Chris, everyone please meet Chris. He is the founder and former CEO and currently chairman of Doxim. Doxim was started in 2000 and has been included as one of Canada's fastest growing companies for over 10 years and was featured in the June 2010 issue of Profit magazine. Doxim has also been recognized as one of the fastest growing companies in North America on Deloitte 2011, 12, 13, 14. Technology Fast 500 list, as well as Deloitte's 11, 12, 13, 14 Fast 50 ranking. It is a privately held company headquartered in Markham, Ontario. They have 8 locations, I believe, across North America, and they have over 500 plus employees as of 2019. Everyone, please welcome Chris Rasmussen. Over to you, Chris.
Good morning, Matt, and thanks for having me here today. Glad to be here.
Absolutely. Well,
good to see you guys again.
If there's anything I missed, please go ahead. Yeah, give people a little bit of background yourself if there's anything I missed.
Yeah, not to puff things up a bit, but there was a lot more of those Profit 500s, I think, up until even last year. And I think it's literally been since around 2007 or 2008. Through to current years, and last year again, and the year before, we were recognized Deloitte Fast 50 and special mention, something about top 15 kind of the larger companies in their recognition group. So last year was a bit of a special year. We crossed a threshold on a run rate of over 100 million in the business, and that was a culmination of a 10-year plan to get from 2 million to 100 million from the end of 2009 to the end of 2019. So I was pretty excited that the team was able to execute on that master plan and drive incredible profitability and shareholder value and growth and all the right things for customers and so on and so forth. It was quite a journey, and the journey continues. Late last year, I moved into a chairman role. We had spent some time working on a succession plan, and I moved into the chairman role for more like on an official basis. I guess I was kind of a chairman before that, but like for
exclusive basis.
That's right. Like for many years, it was, I was the principal shareholder. So
right. Fantastic.
Anyways, yeah, it's been a heck of a ride, and now we're in the midst of a lot of folks dealing through the challenges of a crisis. This one's different than some of the other ones we've had for sure, but a lot of things remain true and consistent for companies that are focused in the B2B software space and technology space, and that's a space that I'm quite familiar with.
Fantastic. Well, let's hop into it then. I guess today's topic is being a CEO during a crisis. So with your experience, Chris, the first question we have is, how has Doxim's operations changed since working from home, and has it been challenging?
Yeah, great. We have a bit of a split in our business. Like some of the businesses, there's a significant services or ongoing delivery requirement for what we do. And in Doxim, about 60% of our staff are what we call knowledge workers. and 40% of our staff work in our production facilities. We have 4 production facilities around North America and 4 offices. So all of our knowledge workers, or people that work in the offices, they've been home since the beginning of March, working remotely. We've had the capability built in as part of our long-term and long-time disaster recovery plan, where people would effectively remote. We've been on voice over IP phones for probably 15, 16 years since the early days of the business. So for some companies, believe it or not, they're still making that transition, but we had pretty much never installed a phone system in any of the facilities we've been at. We've been on voice over IP and remote hosted email, and a lot of, we were SaaS out of the gate as a content management offering back in 2000. So the idea of accessing documents through a browser or accessing any kind of content has been kind of baked into our DNA since the beginning. But 40% of our staff are working in our production facilities. And what we've done over the last couple of months is stagger the hours so that we're having the people not in close proximity to each other. And for those production locations, we typically have between 25 and 100 people in each of those locations. Our biggest location in Detroit, we have 100 people. And what we're doing is we're doing temperature checks when people come in midday and at the end of the shift. And if they don't wear their masks, they're sent home. And if they are offside on the temperature, they're sent home. And it's pretty much as simple as that. We've only had to send home 2 or 3 people in the last couple of months on any of the shifts. And a lot of what we do, so what Doxim does is provide mission critical electronic document delivery, but part of that also is the physical document delivery. So about 25% of all the documents we process, we're still physically producing, printing and mailing with some of our high-speed imaging equipment and stuff like that. So those are the production facilities that I refer to. But the vast majority of the business, the revenue, the customer touch points, the services teams, the implementation teams, the customer success teams, they're all working remotely during this time.
Gotcha. Thank you. So I guess, how are you managing employee productivity? Have you seen any changes and impact engagement during COVID?
We have. There's in fact, for a lot of the teams, they're probably getting more oversight, more guidance, and more check-ins than they ever had, even when they were in the offices, because we've kind of forced that, and the management team at the company's been doing that all the way along, with daily team check-ins, daily stand-up meetings. So we've always been doing those with our implementation teams and our engineering and development teams, but more so in the last few months with customer success, finance, sales, and some of the other what we would call shared services that wouldn't necessarily check in across locations with each other each day. Now we have that as part of the daily routine. Mm-hmm. We also have weekly heads up sessions, and Mike Rogalski, he's the new CEO. He has stepped up. I used to do quarterly business reviews with the whole company on like a broadcast webinar format. Those have now been increased to be kind of as needed, but at least on a monthly basis. And he did that actually when he stepped in late last year. So there's been across the board more communication than we've ever had in the company. And I think by any measure, I used to think we had a lot of communication, but now it's a lot more than that even.
That's fantastic. Yeah, it feels the same thing for a lot of our companies, where management teams are now looking inward rather than focused outward, whether it's on customers, partnerships, investors, whatever. Now's the time for them to put the proper protocols and infrastructure in place for communication, team building, culture. People went from doing quarterly town halls to doing weekly town halls with all their employees. And it's really amazing how, when you take a bit of a pause and look at your company, how productivity can actually increase when you don't get distracted by putting out fires every day. Yeah, that's great. But you guys sound to be pretty much ahead of the curve with this, even if COVID maybe didn't happen. It just accelerated maybe. That's great. So I guess, I mean, I know you're not the CEO now, but in the last crisis, because you've kind of been through probably two of them since 2000 and 2008, what were some of the tough decisions you had to make during the previous crisis? And are they the same ones that are happening today, or is it very different?
If I take them together, they're similar, but they separate. So we went through 9/11 and then the aftermath of 9/11, and that largely affected. We were at a very, I'll call it, formative stage in the development of our license model and our business model. And I've said for years that 9/11 was critical in the development of our business model. I had started an enterprise software company. I thought we'd be selling licenses, $50, $100, $200,000 to these big service providers around the world. And immediately everybody put the checkbooks away and they just wanted to pay us by the documents we processed. So we went from, this big buffet type license model that was going to be on-prem to every client saying, well, can't you just keep running it for us? So we got into recurring transactional SaaS revenue license model, cash model, by osmosis as an after effect of 9/11, because the customers simply were not writing checks after September 2001. And by the following summer, in the summer, I remember June, July, and August of 2002, that was actually the worst of times, because I would caution everybody, give them a heads up, 9 months after is the worst of the worst times. So 9 months after January, February, which is kind of November, December this year, that's the toughest time because the whole pipeline gets used up. And by July of 2002, we had gone from 13 employees down to 2. So
let's pause on that for a second.
Yeah.
9 months after the start of the crisis was the worst time because the pipeline of customers willing to spend was dried up, so they couldn't buy anything new. Is that what you meant?
Our pipeline, all the stuff that you have in your pipeline, everything basically, you consume that, you use that. And what we did not have was an engine building that in the background. So I'll talk to that in one of the later questions.
Sure.
Lessons that I learned. But what my point is, we went from 13 at 9/11 to 9 months later down to 2 people, because we could no longer count on hope and praying for business to come in. We had to live within our means. Right. And that was the amount of cash we had for the rent, the servers, the data center, and a little bit of gas for my car and for one of the developers. So that's where I learned a lot about a whole bunch of things about running a small business. I no longer had people, and I was in there eyeballs deep in a lot of things. So that was 2001, 2002. In 2008, 2009, we did a across the board 10% wage rollback for 9 months, and I went to 0. And my main developer, he took a 50% pay cut. We were the 2 highest paid people in the company. But at that point, we decided to keep the whole team. And what we wanted to do was have everybody in the team on the other side. We didn't know how long it was going to last, if it was going to be 6 months or 9 months. It ended up being a 9-month period from the spring, I think it was March of 09 till around November of 09 that we did that wage rollback. That was where I really saw the team come together and get behind. We did it across the board. It was unanimous. Everybody adjusted their employment agreements. We had a 1-page letter with each person. It was a permanent adjustment. And our commitment was, when we got to the other side of it, that we would reinstate things. And this time, I think it's very different. So in both of those 2 prior situations, there was no subsidies, there was no government, there was no, well, the government's there, but they weren't stepping in with anything like they are now. And I think the difference is, this is not an economic shock, whereas those 2 prior ones, there was economic collateral impact from the travesty in New York, but and then in 08, 09, it was an economic one. So there was, arguably no reason for the government to step in. But this time around, the government said, you can't go to work. You're not allowed to go outside. So that's why I think we have so much more government programs available to help companies. And I say help because, they effectively closed the doors on us and for a lot of companies on the line here. And so there's this kind of arguably implicit requirement for them to offset that somehow. So that's one big thing that's in favor this time around that wasn't there last time. Also for Doxim, our business is a lot larger. So I remember saying around 2008, 2009, we had a lot more levers to pull in the business because the business was bigger, even in 08, 09, than it was back in 2001, 2002. So the larger a business you have, the more employees you have. Like if you have 20, 30, 40 employees in your company, you've got a lot of levers to pull in terms of work share programs, cost share programs. Maybe people were taking a day off or a week off a month in order to work through the challenge. Also at a time when arguably people's costs are a lot lower. It's different when everything else in the outside world is the same. But these days, nobody's traveling. Food is kind of at a basic level for most people. We're not traveling. We're not, a lot of the average kind of household costs are arguably lower this time around. So I think it's not that it's more palatable because it never leaves a good taste in anybody's mouth, but I think it's easier for people to take a 5, a 10, or 15, or 20, 25% wage rollback today than because there's literally nothing else to do. And I'm just taking the argument in favor of those actions. And there's I'm not saying it's palatable ever. A couple of other things this time around, because we learned from the first couple of times, our contracts are way better with flexibility with our suppliers, enforceability with our customers. So things like they can't cancel unless they pay the full balance of term. We did not have that in the last couple of crises, but we baked those into our contracts over time. So our contracting got better. We've done a fair bit of M&A at Doxim, and I think we'll talk a little bit about that later in the questions. But because we had been doing a lot of acquisitions and integrations over the past couple of years, by kind of exercising that muscle, we had built a bunch of flex into the management. And by putting a pause on acquisitions during this time, that flex, that capacity that we had in the management organization in Doxim, that can now be applied to working on communications, crisis management, key customer, key employee issues without overtaxing the environment. So we already had a bunch of flex baked into the system, and I'll talk a little bit about that later, but I think it's important, especially for growing companies, to find a way to build or bake some capacity. And it seems like we never have enough, and I know that firsthand, and practically speaking, you never will have enough. But when you do have that flex, when you're stretched, and then the new business slows down, you actually find you'll have a little bit of flex and capacity. And I think that has really helped the Doxim business in the last 3-4 months, and certainly will carry it through the next 3-4 months, just by putting a pause in the growth. Because really it's about managing the slope of the growth curve. So at any point in time, you've got that extra little bit of capacity when you have a few more months. So I hope that kind of sheds a little bit of light on what some things that happened in the previous crisis there, Matt.
Mm-hmm. That does. Thank you, Chris. I guess so. That kind of answers this question as well. Is like, how have you handled the last crisis, and how did you apply it to today? I think you kind of answered that in the last part of your question. So I think we can move on, unless there's anything else you want to add there.
Yeah, I've got actually 3 points here. So what I would have done differently is I would have pulled back, especially in 08, 09. I would have pulled back sales and BD harder earlier in the cycle in order to fund more product development and systems and automation. So what we, you know, full disclosure, what we've been lacking at Doxim is a lot of internal, like our systems have never caught up with the business. So the business and the growth of the business was always ahead of our systems and our, you know, we're always like with spreadsheets instead of automated systems. So I, you know, knowing what I know now, I probably would have not tried. My ego got in the way. It's like, oh no, I need all these salespeople. I need all these salespeople. But what I would have done is I would have spent more time building out systems and process and technology and automation, so that on the other side, as soon as we start getting traction, boom, drop in the salespeople, and then we have automated systems that can scale. After 08, 09, we could have probably in 10, 11, 12, we could have probably doubled the business every single year, but we didn't have the systems or process. We came out with anemic financial capacity. So had I pulled back, remember I said we kept the whole team because we wanted them on the other side. Had we pulled back like another 10%, that would have given us an extra $1 million a year to be able to either invest in making the business better and faster, or we'd have that war chest to expand and seize the opportunities that were in front of us. So just getting to the other side of the bridge, getting to the other side of the safe zone, you can get there and be anemic and starved, or you can get there and be strong and healthy and have a pack full of food in order to take the next march up the hill. And I think that's something that a lot of folks, just been focused on, how do I get to the other side of this thing? But I would encourage everybody to not just get to the other side, but when you get there, are you going to have an empty pack and you'll be starving, or are you going to have a full pack of food and you can take the next hill?
Yeah, that's interesting, Chris.
Yeah.
Because our feeling is that you know, enterprise customers and, you know, C-level executives have been pushing off those types of implementations and tech stack reviews for a long time. And we thought that there would probably be another 3 to 5 years before sort of Main Street started to adopt a lot of these efficiencies in the business that unfortunately were not around for the last crisis for you to, you know, Salesforce only got started really after the last crisis and started ramping up its cloud CRM. But now there's so many different cloud solutions that you can apply into your business for more efficiency with reporting, analytics and insights, decision-making, product development, things like that, that I think you're right. We're seeing this actually happen now, where the time frame for purchasing software to enhance the efficiencies in your business moved up 3 to 5 years rather than being pushed off, because they're available and people have now time to look inward at rebuilding that. So I'm wondering, if there was more stuff available to you, would you have made that decision easier where it wasn't as maybe abundant? So you had to say, well, I don't want to lose sales, so I'm going to stick with sales because I don't really see where I can look inward to rebuild product, unless maybe it wasn't just a focus then.
Yeah, I agree with you totally. I think there are way more tools. So if you just even have a hint, like, you'd have to be oblivious to not know there are more tools today. Right. And I think that makes it easier to look inward in order to make those investments. My point is that even if we had to build it ourselves, we would have been better off, even though it would have been way less efficient than doing it today. We would have been better off making those investments in, like, I don't have any regrets. We did what we did. But if I could have a do-over, what I would have done is pulled back harder and made more investments in order to have more enablers for the business on the other side. Or if we didn't make the investments in those enablers, systems, technology, whatever, automation, we would have had some more resources, or we would have burned less into our credit lines and our debt facilities. So we'd be able to spring out with more strength. And my last point on this is, every time on the other side of one of these events, there is this big sucking sound that drives growth after each recovery. And I would encourage everybody that you're going to need more. People are important, but you're going to need more than people in order to be able to respond to that. systems, process, scalable tools in order to respond and seize and fill for your organization to fill that sucking sound, because somebody, the market will make sure that gets filled with somebody's technology, and it might as well be yours, and it really will be the folks that are best positioned to be able to action that.
That's great. Good points. I guess this questions for some people on the line. How do I grow my business when the whole market has slowed down? Let's cut to the chase.
Yeah, I'm a dog and a bone on this one, and that's narrow the focus of the business. Focus on the things that are working, whether it's segmentation. Look at really where the cash is coming from, where the business is coming from, where the less painful business is coming from. And I'd say narrow the focus so that it's so small and has a big enough potential that you can be number one or number two in that marketplace. Even if it means you have to narrow the marketplace to be Ontario or Toronto or 416 or 705, like make your thing that you're focusing on so small so that you can be number one in that space, so that you can dominate it in that, however you define that thing. And in my case, what we did with Doxim on the tail end of after 9/11 is we started in 03 and 04, we started focusing on credit unions in Toronto. And I had a partner in Vancouver, credit unions in Greater Vancouver area. So we picked these two areas where I had domain knowledge and expertise and relationships. And on those two things, by the end of 04, we had about 45 customers, and we were living on that. We weren't burning any more cash. And after 04, we never burned another nickel. And it was by the end of 05, all we had was credit union clients and a couple of wealth management clients through a channel partner. And it was all the way, we stayed focused on that all the way through 09. So for the next 5 years, we were doing stuff in healthcare, we were doing stuff in education, and we basically said, we turned it all off. We turned it all off by pricing it high. We never told the customer to go take a hike. We just basically took their price from what it was to some ridiculous number so they would go somewhere else, because it was a lack of focus for our team. So this, how do you grow your business when everything else is slowing down, is you focus on something so you can get excellent at executing on that. And I'm dogging a bone on that, because without having something that is repeatable, that the company can build some muscles on, it's going to be oftentimes very challenging to scale, unless you've got some kind of universal plugin that people can just automatically attach to their stuff. I would encourage somebody to, focus on, if you're in 3 verticals, focus on less than 3. If you're, find the 80-20 and focus on that.
So when you're trying to narrow your focus, there's a bunch of founders and CEOs on the line. What kind of metrics or data points are you trying to aim for? Is it sales cycle? Is it customer acquisition costs? Is it price point, margin? It's interesting you say to get the ones you don't want to focus on, to say no to you increase the price of your product. Does that mean the ones you do want to focus on, you lower the price of your product? What kind of metrics were you looking for to focus in on that group specifically?
Yeah, that's a great question. So the customers that we knew were not strategic, we priced ourselves out of those spaces. For the ones that we wanted to, we doubled down and spent more time listening to them in terms of understanding how they're, and I've got a question coming up, but basically it's really, how does their spreadsheet work? Because one of the things we found difficulty was trying to apply our pricing model to their way of purchasing, because we were dealing with operations and finance and CFOs and these kind of guys as our prime buyers. Right. And they literally didn't know how to buy our stuff, because we were replacing physical documents in the mail with PDFs online, and they're like, well, that should be free. And I'm like, no, it's not free. It costs, in fact, a ton because of all this extra security we have. And it took us years to figure out how to get our spreadsheets to be used by the customers. But it started with that focus, and we would have not been able to maximize our profitability profile. We would have not been able to optimize our pricing model without having that intimate, those hundreds and hundreds of conversations with our clients that we ultimately found, okay, these guys see value, they'll pay for it, they're loyal. It's about all those things you talked about. It's about churn, cost of acquisition, profitability, not on per customer. We looked at it, if we had the market, what would the business look like? And we priced it as though we had the market. So we didn't price it based on our marginal cost of production or our next fee. We priced it based on, if we had the market, what would our pricing need to be in order to stay as a leader in the marketplace? So we looked at it from that perspective, and with that view and support from a couple key customers that bought into that vision as well, they really helped support us when it was important that we kept pricing, because a lot of those clients, they talk to each other. So in our case, the clients talk to each other, they share pricing. So it was important that we not have somebody paying $10,000 a month and the next guy paying $1,000 a month. So we needed to land on a model that made sense for everyone in our market.
Those are great points. I think we should transfer into the transforming of legacy industries. I think a lot of founders and CEOs have built in, automation, machine learning, things like that, data insights, all those types of things into their value propositions with their businesses. And you were at the forefront of that in, the early 2000s, trying to transform a very legacy paper-based industry. Yeah. So it would be great to sort of hear what was one of the toughest challenges you faced early on at Doxim when trying to change legacy workflows.
Yeah, and it's kind of, I kind of was reading ahead in my notes. So basically, what we found was the buyers, they honestly did, like, we'd get a champion, we'd get a business, somebody in the business that really got what we were doing, and then they'd punt us over to procurement and say, do a deal with these Doxim guys. And the reality was they didn't know how to buy our stuff. We didn't know how to sell it, they didn't know how to buy it. And we'd give them a spreadsheet and they're like, I don't know what this means, or what's the migration going to be from paper to electronic. So in the end, we had to price it so we had the bulk of the risk, but we did the pricing so that we had no risk, but we never explained that to them. It took us a long time investing time to get them to appreciate how our model worked. Sometimes these were face-to-face meetings, but we would have sessions where I'd literally walk them through the spreadsheets, I'd walk them through the models, and they won't all get it. Some of them will. And what we did was we focused on we changed the personas of our buyers, and we were able to identify who were going to be the early adopters and who were going to be the absolute tail end laggers, and who were going to be the guys in the middle of the bubble. And we segmented our prospects, not by size, but by propensity to buy, because we knew we were coming up with a brand new pricing paradigm for the marketplace. And I had seen enough in the 90s to know that and believe our pricing model was correct, but we need to get the right traction. And we used what I today call a bowling pin approach to identify, okay, who do we get first? And then who are their contacts for referential data points? Because they're going to want to phone and say, well, who else are you working with? And if you're selling into community-based organizations, whether it's nonprofits or government or what have you, or healthcare or education, they're going to talk to each other. And they're going to want reference points. They know, oh, if I'm selling to Toronto District School Board, if you don't have Metro Separate School Board, well then, I'm not going to buy from you. Or, you got to have Peel. So like you guys will know what those relationships are in your ecosystem. Mm-hmm. And it wasn't just about size or, they should have our stuff, but it was really who are the buyers and how curious are they to learn about something new. And that's really what helped us. That tactic, I had one sales guy and he just got it. He was a duck to water and he was able to read the tea leaves of how people were connected and how they would buy and refer us to one another. And that really was the biggest difference in our early stage.
It sounds like customer behavior analysis was something that one salesperson latched onto quite early. And what that means for people on the line is it's when you look at the motivations of every person in the buyer journey, whether it's the CEO who gets paid on being a visionary and driving the company in the right direction and where the puck is going. When you're selling to them, they buy into the vision story. When you're selling to someone in procurement, compliance, legal, they don't get paid when the vision comes to fruition. They only lose when it doesn't work out. So they have only things to lose when it comes to signing on to a new system, and they don't really have much to gain. And so if you have an understanding of how to break down what those individuals along the journey need to see, as Chris is saying, get the person from another CEO of one of your customers to speak to the current CEO you're trying to pitch to. But don't put a CEO on the call with someone in legal and compliance or procurement, because their motivations are completely different and they're not going to speak the same language. So when it's dealing with compliance and security and risk, they want to know that you have all those, standards and certifications. So you got to get ahead of the curve on that. Is that what you're saying, Chris?
Yeah, and there's not just the role or the chair they sit in on the customer side of the equation. So a lot of times we think of persona as the role or the title or the job function. But what we looked at was a curiosity, propensity, and are they a first mover, or are they just, all their stuff is old. Like, these guys haven't bought anything new in 20 years. They're not going to be an early adopter. So literally stop wasting your time on those guys. They're just not going to buy. It's better to get a small company that's curious, that can be a reference point for somebody who's a little bit bigger than a little bit bigger than a little bit bigger than a little, like I went to Sudbury, I went to Sault Ste. Marie. I drove there like 7 times one winter because that was where a couple of our buyers were. Now, I wouldn't recommend anybody drive to Sault Ste. Marie 7 times in one winter, but that's what we were doing in those early days. In order, like, we had to go and get and meet and talk to the folks to get them on side with the long term. And a lot of it was building trust as well. So don't get me wrong. Like, I'm not saying anything's easy and that we got it on the first take. Like, this took years for us to nail down. But if I could do it again, I would. I just have learned so much as a manager on this journey as well that I've been on, that the timeline for that execution next time around would be a lot faster.
That's great. How do you get people to change when they don't need to or they don't want to? Exactly what we were just talking about, whether it's people internally at your organization or externally with customers. What's worked for you?
Well, a couple things have worked. What we've found helps is that if we bake into our process or our methods or our financial metrics, we bake into those things, and also similarly into the sales process, from the tip of the spear at lead generation all the way through in the communications, from the website communications to how the staff interact and engage with the clients. What we found was, if we left everything until it was the bottom of the funnel, where we said, okay, well, now you got to change this and now you got to change that. At the bottom of the funnel, everything got stuck, and it was really difficult to get deals closed. It was tomorrow, because they're just not getting it, and they're just not on board with that. We called that, these deals got stuck at the end of the line in decision mode for months and months and quarters. And in one case, we had one opportunity. I remember it was like 1,300 and something days. It was in my Salesforce. Like,
wow.
That is years and years on the finish line. And it wasn't until we started telling clients at the beginning of the communications, you're going to have certain responsibilities. So I think I get into this in one of the next questions, but we basically had to share with the clients, this is not like us taking on this responsibility here. It's a shared responsibility, and this shared responsibility, you're going to have stuff to do. It's not like you're just going to cut a PO and we're going to go away and do the work. But in order for this behavior change to meet the success metrics you've defined in your business, there are certain things your staff, your organization is going to have to do. So it was the communication of that shared responsibility that really helped us set the right expectations so that the deals could go through quicker, because as they started getting into the project planning, they're like, whoa, we can't do all this stuff. And then they got to line up a project internally, and we kind of had the cart in front of the horse. But as soon as we got that lined up better, we were in we were better postured to have the deals go faster and go smoother through the winning and the signing and the contracting process.
That's smart. Yeah. What were some change management tactics you use in onboarding customers? Change management is something I think every software company faces, but what were some of the things that worked for you?
Yeah, so this is an expansion of my prior point. So initially we took on too much responsibility for project go live success. And over time, we realized we needed our clients to have more financial and mental sweat equity in the project. For a long time, we called it, and I didn't invent this word, but we called it the IKEA effect, where we have a cookie cutter process, same as if you buy something from IKEA, but you know, in order to make the bookshelf, you got to get on the floor and put it all together yourself. And it doesn't take a lot of time, but it's funny how people have so much pride and ownership of the IKEA shelves they build versus other stuff they just buy and use, even if it's relatively cheap. And a lot of us remember that kind of stuff as students. But the ownership after go live really, and that was the same kind of ownership we had in our early adopter clients, where they would get in there literally they would make it work. But after we had crossed the chasm, all those buyers in the middle, their behavior tactics weren't what we wanted it to be. And we need to find a way to get them involved in the process a little bit more so that they would take ownership post go live. And once we made it relatively easy for them to do, and we got better and better at that, the post go live, our NPS scores went up, like everything started going well for the business when we got that part of it right.
Interesting. Yeah, a lot of companies struggle with that. I think it's something that you shouldn't try to rush, and it's important, I think, to have a lot of conversations with your customers before you even try to go full steam with it. When did you know you had changed the status quo of your industry?
Okay, I got a kind of three-part answer here. So the first part is when our customers started asking us for best practices. Honestly, this is around 06, 07. I didn't even know what that was. We didn't know what it was. We didn't know what it meant. And we were just trying to figure this out like everybody else. Then the second stage, the second sign was when they asked us for our standard implementation schedule, or our standard schedule for implementation, or our implementation process, or our project management process. How is this going to get done? We knew that we were onto something because we had begun to educate them that we have a standard process versus everybody else that's just going to figure it out on the fly. So we differentiated ourselves early on by actually having, it became part of our sales kit. This is our standard implementation process. And then the third stage was around 08, end of 07, 08. We had developed a few critical XML schemas, and we're in the electronic document space, so a lot of you guys know that stuff. XML is not new to you guys anyways. This was really the game changer, because we had developed a couple of standards for processing any type of statement, whether it's a wealth management statement or a bank statement or a daily notice or an annual report or anything like that. And it wasn't so much when we created that standard, but rather when our customers would ask us for the standard without even it being part of an RFP. They would just say, hey, what's your standard? Because they were going to code their systems to our standard, because they had already decided they're going to our system. It was that stage where we had differentiated ourselves so much from everybody else. I knew, well, we didn't put up signs, hey, we won, but I knew there was nobody that was going to catch us, not in the Canadian marketplace.
It's like when the student becomes a sensei.
I'm sorry?
It's like when the student becomes a sensei, the teacher.
That's right.
Your customers start asking you for advice and questions. And I think it's not something that the CEO, unless he's on the front line selling, is going to hear every day. But it's really important for the people on the line who have salespeople to have them keep an ear out for that and
Absolutely.
relay that information back to the team and keep it in Salesforce. Because I can tell you, when I was started to get asked questions about industry best practices, when I was a salesperson, I was like, well, I'm the one who's supposed to be selling you. You're supposed to be telling me what I should be building for you. You're asking me now what I should be telling you to sell, basically.
Yeah.
That's interesting. Wow. I think that's a really big nugget that people should keep on to. All right. I think it's time to move into the sexy part of the discussion, M&A. Chris
Great.
is an absolute expert at this. I don't know how many deals he's done in the last decade or so, but we'll try to get some tidbits from him on this. So I think maybe just talk about your strategy a little bit on the M&A side, and then we can kind of hop into this first question, Chris.
Yeah. So my first comment on this is, and I'll answer your question directly, but my first comment is, please do not look to M&A to solve your problems, whatever your problems are. It is more work and more hurt than you can believe. So here's what I would encourage you to do. Look for M&A to do one of two things. Either get you more customers that look like your current customers and that you understand and know how to take care of. Or two, products to fill in gaps or align with your current offerings. So either to acquire more customers that look like what you have, or to get products that augment or fill in gaps for what your current offerings are. And that's the way we always looked at the acquisition. So we were either looking for customers in a new territory that looked like the rest of our customers. And sometimes we bought technology. So in Doxim, we did a total of 10 acquisitions. And the one-page business case, the thesis for each one, we clearly stated whether it was a customer acquisition. It couldn't be both. There had to be one that was more than the other. Customer acquisition or a product acquisition. 7 out of the 10 were for customers. 3 out of the 10 were for products. So it was mostly, Doxim's M&A approach was mostly a land grab, looking for more of what we already knew how to take care of. We weren't going to Europe, adding on a product, new product, new geography, bad combo. New product, new market, bad combo. Same product, new market, that could work. Same product, new market, that can work. So we ended up with this 3-dimensional cube of products, markets, and geography, vertical markets and geography. And we could go one hard step to the right or left or up, but we couldn't make a diagonal move. We couldn't go new product, new market. That would be against our M&A rules.
That's great. So I guess what size of company should start thinking about M&A? It's not really about a size, I guess, in your mindset. It's about hitting those targets you mentioned.
Yeah, the first company we acquired was 40% bigger than us.
Wow.
But I knew all the employees. I knew every customer. I knew their business. It was my business.
Wow. Okay.
So that for me, there was no risk. So it became a financial conversation.
Gotcha.
But the product market is same products, same market, just more geography.
Okay, perfect. So I know you're the art of the negotiation. What are some tactics that you can share to help close a deal that'll work for you?
Okay, I'll try and get through these fairly quickly because I'm cognizant of time here. The first is try to never give a price. Let the other side put the stake in the ground on pricing. Don't be afraid to talk about what market price is. If you go there, you better have done your homework. So I take a lot of pride in never giving anybody the number first, and always finding a way to get them their number. If they didn't know what their number was, I would spend time between meetings educating them on what things are worth, so that the next time we had a chat, they had an idea what market price was. Now, another is a biased disclosure that I have. Of the 10 deals we did at Doxim while I was there, none of them were bank deals. 0. So my theme is don't buy banked deals.
Just make sure everyone knows what that means.
Yeah, where there's an investment banker running a professional process for the seller.
Yeah.
So in my experience, they'll be too expensive. By definition, you will be the high bidder or the sucker. And instead, find your own, develop your own proprietary deals. So when you're doing acquisitions, if you kind of source them through your own company means or your relationships, those are called proprietary deals. And if they're running a professional process, like they hire Raymond James or one of the investment banking firms, those are called their banked deals. That's just what they're called. And they're much more organized. They're much more structured. They have all their shit together most of the time. Whereas the unbanked deals, you know, the guy, you're gonna be spending time with him. You know, I helped one guy scan his employment contracts with his staff. Like, you know, at the end of the day, they have to give them to you. But you know, sometimes they're not pristine, perfectly clean. But chances are you can get to know them a lot better. What I did is I worked with the sellers to find out what their definition of success was. And if I thought I could get there, like if a guy wanted some ridiculous number and he was just, you know, that's the number he wanted, I just wasn't going to get there. But if you think you can get there, what I found was most folks that do not have the professional investors like you guys all on the line do, where you get access to, you know, how much are companies selling for? What are the transactional values at? Like there's a lot of guys that they're just not on that curve. They're not on that wavelength. These are guys and girls that have built their businesses, heart and soul, and they put everything into it. And for them, they go to their accountant and say, how much is the business worth? Their accountant will tell them, well, a good business is worth 5-6 times EBITDA. That's what their accountants will tell them. And a lot of times they'll go to their accountants. They're not going to go down to Bay Street and find an investment banker to say how much their business is worth. And I was surprised. Pretty much all the deals we ever did were between 4 and 6 times EBITDA.
Yeah, right in the sweet spot. So during the last crisis, sorry, Chris, did you want to add to that?
That's it.
Sorry, during the last crisis, how did the banks react to the environment regarding lending and M&A? And do you think it's changed now?
Well, I think my short answer for all these kind of things is it all depends. But the first company we bought was a company serving the brokerage firms in the brokerage marketplace in the spring of 2009. It closed in September of 2009, and the bank I was dealing with freaked out. So I had to look for another bank. And in the end, I switched banks because the one I went to understood the market. They understood my business. They understood my cash flow. We got a cash flow loan for the deal. I had to go back to the seller and say, I need you to take more of a note, more of a vendor take back. And we had to, you know, so we ended up doing a third in equity and a third in, I signed up for a bank loan for the combined company, and the seller took back a third in a note that, and we paid all that off over 2 years. So you can do deals in tough markets in the worst of times. They may not be cash. They may not, you know, somebody might not write you a check for common shares. They may have a bunch of strings and things attached, but there is always a way to get a deal done. And the way I would encourage everybody to think about that is to be, first and foremost, be curious, ask around. Don't stop at the first or second no. If the deal makes sense, and I mean really makes sense, you have to be able to articulate the thesis in a few words and a few numbers. And if there's a bunch of hope and prayer, you're not going to get too many takers. But if you can really articulate the deals simply and effectively, you should be able to find someone who'll have the conviction to support your conviction. And when you find that, reach across the table and find a way to do the deal. Because at the end of the day, my experience is if you want to make a deal work, because once it's closed, you own it. You own it. And I can guarantee you the bank's going to tie all the shit together. So you're not going to be able to chop it off. So it all gets cross-collateralized and tied together. So now you have your boat and you just latched another boat to it. And if what, you can't have one that sinks, like they both sink together. So in my experience, if you want to make it work, you'll make it work. And you got to have the conviction to want to make it work. And if you do, then you should find a way to make that happen.
Great, thank you.
That's and I found a bank that worked with me for that.
So I think this is something that a lot of people question, and you kind of talked about it a bit before, acquiring the right customers, the right product mix. Do you think it's a good idea to acquire growth inorganically during this time? Or does the timing not really matter?
So my response here is kind of, it's a little bit cheeky, but it's, if we think in the category of buy low and sell high, I would say, depending upon what you're trying to buy, tough times are usually prices are low, relatively speaking. But I think you always have to look at, is the thing that I want to buy relatively priced higher or lower than 6 months ago or a year ago, or practically speaking, when I'm going to sell it in 2 or 3 years? Because chances are you're not going to sell it in 6 months. But if you're going to sell it, if you're going to buy it today, you're probably going to hold it for at least 2 years, more practically 3 years. And it becomes a relative thing. And if the prices of what you're going to buy are relatively low today, it's a good time to buy. I would say you don't ever really want to prey on the dying, but it sure helps if you have a bigger plan, more conviction, or more momentum than they do. Or if you have more profitability when they don't have profitability. And it really helps if you have a sponsor that supports your business model and your team. So it starts with the thesis of the business, the relative valuation of what you're going to buy, the method of which you're going to pay for it. Are you paying for it in cash? Is it a loan? Is it equity? In my experience, equity is the most expensive way of paying for something. I would encourage you guys to use the seller's money. Get them to take money over time, over 1, 2, 3 years, but also to get it paid off as quickly as possible.
Yeah, I think getting growth inorganically, Chris, from our perspective for maybe earlier stage companies, to kind of fill your pipeline with somebody else's existing sales is okay if the deal is, financially sound and you're not taking on additional risk that you're just going to have to fight off down the road. But if you're trying to replace your growth with somebody else's, that's probably not going to last very long, because at the end of the day, it's your company and your product that needs to continue on the journey serving those customers. Yeah. So it may just be a splash in the pan for the short term to buy that top line growth number. If you backfill it with the same value proposition that those customers are used to from the customer you bought it from, you got to make sure it makes sense. And so I don't think inorganic growth should be isolated to this time or the future or past. It's really about, can you buy that growth and then level up on top of it and maintain that for a long period of time.
Yeah, like a lot of times, again, we haven't really talked about this as far as, what comes with the acquisitions. A number of the acquisitions we've made have come with awesome people. Like every business comes with capable management, or you shouldn't buy it. But I would say in some cases, we have really augmented our management teams in sales or in operations or in engineering with some great people that really helped us just kick it up. And then that would permeate across the whole business. But to your point, if you're doing it for a shot in the arm, you want to do it so that it's more of a permanent nature, and you'll want to maybe tie in some of those managers or some of those people, or who knows, maybe they have a piece of technology that's just amazing. But chances are, if they do, it's going to be pretty expensive. What we found was sometimes you can buy, I'll say, on a scale of 1 to 10, you can buy a business that's a 7 or an 8 that has some 10 people in it. The businesses that are a 9 or a 10 are going to be usually prohibitively expensive, especially for smaller companies to acquire. But a lot of times you can get some really, really good people. I've been helping a bunch of companies out lately that have been looking at companies where there is some particular talent, usually in a new geography, that they'd really like to have on their team that they've known through global events in prior businesses they've been involved with. But a lot of, especially these days, the geography's wide and people are so used to using Zoom and remote webinars that, you can cover a lot of ground in business these days. And although the Canadian dollar up against the US dollar is not at a high point, we're doing fairly well on a global scale. So depending upon the scope of, where you're thinking about the M&A activity, there could be some opportunities for what we call these acqui-hires, where the hires come with the acquisition and they want to be part of that go-forward management team.
Right. Well, we're coming up on the hour, and this is our last question. So if anyone does have any additional questions, please post them in the chat. Again, thank you very much for taking the time. This is a recording, so it will be shared later. But the last question we have, Chris, is everyone is, windshield is foggy, the economy, most sector outlooks are pretty bleak. How are founders supposed to be thinking about forecasting and planning and communicating with boards on their operational and financial plans in these uncertain times?
Well, I think you got to get to the truth, and you got to get to the facts and not sugarcoat anything, because that way you're going to be able to get some really good discussions as far as exploring what options are. If you do not have the systems that get you to the truth and clarity in your pipeline, then I would encourage you to spend the time to do that. But what I found is the advisors really can only help when they're not dealing with half-truths. They can only help when they have the real facts, and they'll be able to a lot of times just laser right in on it's churn, or it's let's do something with to change our contracts, or let's come up with a spiff for the reps, or let's come up. You'd be surprised as soon as you get to the truth how you can get creative with new programs for marketing or for sales or for product. I always found it surprising. I was a chief cook and bottle washer in Doxim for many years. And a lot of times I was initially apprehensive when I got aboard about sharing too much details. And what I found was they were yearning for that so much, and they want to help. That's why they're on the board. That's why they made the investment. And that's why they're putting their time in this. Like invariably, they got better things to do. And what they want to do is find a way to say, hey, I think if we tried this, and then you can actually begin doing experiments with the support of the board, rather than on a whim and a prayer. And hey, if it works out, great. But if it doesn't, so I think having the experiments and getting the facts on the table is one of the best things that somebody can do. And don't be afraid to ask for some guidance or help. Don't be afraid to. People genuinely want to help. There's, you know, like there's nothing to be gained by delaying getting to the truth on things.
Yeah, I think also like some people are thinking maybe using the board's time now to throw the kitchen sink with all the problems that they've probably been experiencing pre-COVID to just get it out there. And I think that if you're going to do that, you need to be prepared for the radically transparent pushback from investors in your board to have a very, very, deep discussion about problems about the business. And you need to be open to that. You should be having those conversations all the time. But if you're really going to throw everything out there in this time period, you got to be expecting, pushback on your plans, on your vision, on your go-to-market strategy, because your, Q2 or 2020 playbook that you had agreed to with the board previously probably is not going to fly anymore. And you need to be open to that as a founder, as an operator, because everything is now on the table. If that's sort of like what you're going to come at the board with, a kitchen sink, you got to be open to the other changes as well that are coming your way.
Yeah, and that's why that cuts both ways. So if you're going to you use a kitchen sink, but if you're going to back up the garbage truck and kind of dump it all over the floor, I would say, please, for your own sake, don't do that. Try to apply a filter on all the things that you can deal with as a manager, and manage that stuff, and really focus the 2 or 3 things you're going to put on the table for the board to talk about, that they're not going to have to do the management 101 stuff. Because when they have to start, in my experience, when they have to start doing the management 101 stuff, it oftentimes doesn't bode well for the people on the team, because the board is an incredibly blunt instrument. It's not a sharp scalpel. It can be a blunt instrument for making changes in the business. So to your point, Matt, be careful what you wish for if you start putting a bunch of laundry list of things for the board to be debating about, like, and put the, focus the conversation on, the important milestones and the important objectives for the business, whether it's retention or bookings growth or building the pipeline, or onboarding and ramping up productivity by sales rep, things like that. And you may take the lever, take the foot off the pedal on one area, but it does not give you the privilege to take the pedal off, or the foot off the pedal in all areas, and just say, it's just all going to go to crap for 6 months and there's nothing I can do about it. I would say that is completely not the right approach, because there is always things that you can do in order to minimize risk for the business, to take risk out for the employees that are there, to take risk out for yourself as a principal in the business, and for the shareholders and investors in the business. And that's always, taking the high road, taking the best approach for the business, I found always served me well.
That's good advice. Thank you, Chris. Well, I don't think we have any additional questions.